The billionaire only dated models, until his new assistant walked into his office and stole his... Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew walking through those glass doors would change everything. She just didn't know how much. Lana Spencer adjusted the strap of her worn leather bag as she stepped into the marble lobby of Dreyer Development, her reflection multiplying endlessly in the polished surfaces around her. 28 floors of gleaming steel and glass stretched above her, each one representing the empire built by a man she'd only seen in business magazines, always surrounded by leggy blondes and million-dollar deals. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt eternal. Lana pressed her palms against her navy blazer, the same one she'd worn to her mother's last doctor's appointment 3 months ago. The fabric was starting to pill at the elbows, but it was professional enough. It had to be. This job has to work, she reminded herself, watching the numbers climb. 28 years old, and this is your shot. The receptionist, a stunning redhead with perfectly manicured nails, barely looked up from her computer. You must be the new assistant. Mr. Dreyer is in the corner office. Just knock first. He's had a rough morning. Lana walked down the hall, her heels clicking softly against the marble. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the bustling streets of downtown Chicago, 30 floors below. Everything here screamed money, the kind of money she'd never known, the kind that bought silence and convenience and beautiful women who never had to worry about late rent or medical bills. She paused outside the imposing oak door, her hand raised to knock. From inside she could hear a man's voice, sharp and controlled. I don't care if she's crying, Davidson. If she can't handle the pressure, find someone who can. We're not running a therapy clinic here. Lana knocked twice, firm but respectful. Come in. The voice was deeper in person, carrying an edge that made her spine straighten instinctively. She turned the handle and stepped inside. Jackson Dreyer stood with his back to her, phone pressed to his ear, staring out at the city skyline. Even from behind, he commanded attention. Tall, broad shoulders beneath a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, dark hair just slightly tousled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. When he turned around, Lana understood why models flocked to him, but it was his eyes that caught her off guard. Grey-blue, like storm clouds, and completely exhausted. I'll call you back, he said into the phone, never breaking eye contact with her. He hung up and studied her for a long moment, his gaze traveling from her sensible pumps to her neat bun, lingering on her face with something that might have been surprise. You're the new assistant. It wasn't a question. Lana Spencer. And yes, I am. She stepped forward, extending her hand. Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Dreyer. He shook her hand briefly, his grip firm and warm. Your resume says you've been out of steady work for 2 years. I was caring for my mother. She had Alzheimer's. Lana kept her voice steady, professional. She wouldn't apologize for love. Something flickered across his features, too quick to interpret. I see. Well, Mrs. Spencer, I should be clear about expectations. I work long hours, I travel frequently, and I don't tolerate mistakes or emotional outbursts. He gestured toward the door. Did you hear that conversation when you arrived? I heard you firing someone for being human. The words left her mouth before she could stop them. The silence that followed was deafening. Jackson Dreyer stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a heartbeat, Lana was certain she'd just lost the job before she'd even started, but then something shifted in his eyes. A spark of what might have been interest? Excuse me. Lana lifted her chin slightly. You asked if I heard the conversation. I did, and that's what I heard. Someone being dismissed for showing emotion. If that's how you handle your team, I should probably know now. He took a step closer, and she caught a hint of expensive cologne mixed with coffee. Most people who walk into this office are intimidated by me, Mrs. Spencer. They agree with everything I say, laugh at my jokes, and tell me what they think I want to hear. I'm not most people. For the first time since she'd entered the room, Jackson Dreyer almost smiled. Almost. No, he said quietly, his voice carrying a note she couldn't quite identify. I'm beginning to see that you're not. He moved behind his massive desk, settling into the leather chair with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to power. But when he looked at her again, there was something different in his expression, a crack in the armor she hadn't expected to find. The job starts now, Mrs. Spencer. Your desk is outside. My coffee is black, my meetings run on time, and my personal life stays personal. He paused, his fingers drumming once against the desk surface. And Mrs. Spencer, "Yes, Mr. Dreyer? Don't ever assume you know what kind of man I am based on one conversation." As Lana turned to leave, she felt the weight of his gaze on her back. She'd expected arrogance, demanded respect, and prepared for coldness. What she hadn't expected was the loneliness she'd glimpsed in those storm-grey eyes. And as she settled at her new desk, organizing the chaos of files and messages left by her predecessor, one thought echoed in her mind. What happened to you, Jackson Dreyer? She had no idea that in the office behind her, he was asking himself the exact same question about her. What do you think Lana saw in Jackson's eyes that made her realize there was more to him than the cold billionaire facade? Have you ever met someone who completely challenged your first impression of them? The coffee was wrong, and somehow that felt like the perfect metaphor for everything. Lana stared at the steaming mug in her hands, dark roast, black, no sugar, exactly as Jackson had specified. But as she approached his office door at 7:30 a.m., she could already hear the tension radiating from within. Phone calls, sharp commands, the sound of a man who hadn't slept properly in weeks. She knocked softly and entered without waiting for permission. "Your coffee, Mr. Dreyer." She set it on his desk, noticing the way his expensive shirt was already wrinkled, his tie loosened despite the early hour. He glanced up from his computer screen, those storm-grey eyes bloodshot and unfocused. "Thank you." His voice was hoarse, distracted. "The Patterson contract needs to be reviewed by 9. The zoning committee meeting moved to 10:30, and I need you to reschedule lunch with... When did you last eat?" The question stopped him mid-sentence. He blinked, as if trying to process why his assistant was asking about his meals instead of taking notes. "Excuse me." Lana studied his face, the sharp cheekbones more pronounced than they should be, the slight tremor in his hands as he reached for the coffee. "You're running on caffeine and stress hormones. When did you last have actual food?" "Mrs. Spencer, I don't pay you to monitor my eating habits." "No, you pay me to make sure you can function effectively." She crossed her arms, unfazed by his dismissive tone. Hard to close billion-dollar deals when you're about to collapse from exhaustion. For a moment, something flickered across his expression. Surprise, maybe even grudging respect. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with renewed interest. "You've been here exactly 18 hours, and you're already trying to manage my life. I'm trying to do my job." Lana moved to the window, glancing down at the busy street below. "Your previous assistant left detailed notes. Apparently, she tried to get you to eat lunch for 6 months. You ignored her every time, and that's why she's no longer here." "No." Lana turned back to face him, her voice gentle but firm. "She's no longer here because you scared her into quitting. There's a difference." The silence stretched between them, charged with intention Lana couldn't quite name. Jackson's fingers drummed against his desk, once, twice, before he stood and walked to the window beside her. "You don't know anything about me, Miss Spencer. I know you haven't been home in 2 days. I know you've been wearing the same shirt since yesterday morning, just with different ties. And I know that whatever you're running from, it's not going to be solved by working yourself into the ground." He turned sharply to face her, and for a split second, his carefully constructed mask slipped. She saw raw exhaustion, yes, but something deeper, a pain so profound it made her chest ache in sympathy. "You think you have me figured out?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of years. "I think," Lana said carefully, "that you're brilliant at building empires and terrible at taking care of yourself. And I think someone taught you that needing help was weakness." The words hung in the air like a confession. Jackson's jaw tightened, and she thought she'd pushed too far, but then he did something that surprised them both. He laughed. Not the polished corporate laugh she'd heard him use on phone calls, but something real and slightly broken. "My mother used to say the same thing." The admission seemed to catch him off guard. He rubbed his forehead, suddenly looking younger than his 37 years. "She'd make me sit at the kitchen table until I finished every bite of dinner, no matter how late I came home from school." Smart woman. She was. His voice carried a weight of loss that made Lana's heart squeeze. "She died when I was 22. Breast cancer. 3 months from diagnosis to the end." Lana felt the air shift between them. This wasn't the polished billionaire from the magazines. This was a man carrying grief like a second skin, so familiar he'd forgotten it was there. "I'm sorry." "Don't." He straightened, the walls starting to rebuild themselves. "I don't need pity." "Good, because I wasn't offering any." Lana moved back toward the door, then paused. "I was offering understanding. There's a difference." She had almost reached the doorway when his voice stopped her. "Mrs. Spencer." "Yes?" "There's a deli on 5th Street, corner of Madison." They make a good pastrami sandwich. He cleared his throat, looking anywhere but at her. If you're going out for lunch. Lana smiled, the first real smile she'd given since walking into this building. I'll make sure to remember that, Mr. Dreyer. As she settled back at her desk, Lana couldn't shake the image of Jackson as a 22-year-old boy, sitting at a kitchen table, trying to be strong enough to carry the world. She understood that weight, had carried her own version of it through her mother's illness, but she also understood something else now, something that made her chest flutter with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. Beneath all that armor, Jackson Dreyer was still that boy who missed his mother's cooking. An hour later, when she knocked on his door with a pastrami sandwich from 5th and Madison, he looked up at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You didn't have to. I know. She set the bag on his desk. But sometimes we do things because we want to, not because we have to. As she turned to leave, she heard him unwrap the sandwich, and for the first time since she'd started working there, she heard something that made her heart skip. Jackson Dreyer said very quietly, "Thank you." But what she didn't know was that he wasn't just thanking her for the food, he was thanking her for seeing him as more than the cold, untouchable billionaire everyone else saw, and that terrified him more than any business deal ever had. The last thing Lana expected to find when she arrived at work was Jackson Dreyer sleeping at his desk. It was 6:45 a.m., 15 minutes before she usually started her day, but she'd come in early to prepare for the board meeting. The executive floor was silent, bathed in the soft grey light of dawn filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She'd assumed she'd be alone, but there he was, slumped forward in his leather chair, his head resting on his forearms atop a stack of contracts. His dark hair was disheveled, and even in sleep, tension lined his features. The expensive suit jacket he'd worn yesterday hung wrinkled on the back of his chair. Lana stood in the doorway studying him. Without the sharp alertness in his eyes, without the calculated control in his posture, Jackson looked young, vulnerable, human. She noticed the empty coffee cups scattered across his desk, 4 of them, the pizza box from late last night, still containing 2 cold slices. Her heart clenched as she realized he'd probably never left the building. Moving quietly, she retrieved a soft throw blanket from the small couch in his office, a blanket that looked like it had never been used, and gently draped it over his shoulders. He stirred slightly, but didn't wake. "What are you running from?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Bad dreams, mostly." Lana jumped, her hand flying to her chest. Jackson's eyes were open now, watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. But there was no anger in his gaze, no embarrassment at being caught vulnerable, just tired honesty. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. I just thought that I looked pathetic sleeping at my desk." He sat up slowly, rubbing his neck with a grimace. "That you looked exhausted." Lana stepped back, giving him space. "When did you last sleep in an actual bed?" Jackson considered the question seriously, as if he genuinely had to think about it. "Tuesday? Maybe Monday?" He glanced at his watch and swore softly. "What day is it?" "Thursday." "Right." He ran his hands through his hair, trying to restore some semblance of order. "The board meeting is at 9. It's been moved to 10:30. I called everyone this morning." Lana kept her voice gentle, matter-of-fact. "I also had your dry cleaning picked up and brought you a fresh shirt." She gestured to the garment bag hanging on the coat rack. Jackson stared at it, then at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." She moved to his desk, efficiently clearing away the coffee cups and pizza box. "But you can't present the Morrison development proposal looking like you slept in your clothes, which technically you did." For a moment she thought he might argue, might retreat behind his walls again. Instead, he did something that surprised them both. He smiled. A real smile, soft and grateful and completely unguarded. "You know, Ms. Spencer, I'm beginning to think you're either the best assistant I've ever had, or you're trying to manage my entire life. Can't it be both?" The laugh that escaped him was warm and genuine, and it transformed his entire face. Gone was the cold, calculating billionaire. In his place was a man who looked like he might actually enjoy being alive. "I suppose it can." He stood, reaching for the garment bag. "Give me 10 minutes to make myself presentable." "Take 15, the world won't end if you move a little slower today." As he disappeared into the private bathroom attached to his office, Lana found herself arranging his desk with care. She noticed things she hadn't before: a small framed photo turned face down in the corner, a worn leather journal with pages that looked well thumbed, a prescription bottle with a name she couldn't quite read. She didn't touch any of them, but she filed the observations away. When Jackson emerged, transformed by the fresh shirt and a quick wash, he looked more like the man from the magazine covers. But something had shifted. The rigid perfection was still there, but softer somehow. "Better?" he asked. "Much." Lana handed him a fresh cup of coffee. Black, no sugar, exactly how he liked it. "Though you might want to consider actually going home tonight. Home is—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Home is very quiet." The admission hung between them, heavy with meaning. Lana understood quiet houses, understood the kind of silence that pressed in on you until working all night seemed preferable to facing your own thoughts. "Quiet isn't always bad," she said carefully. "It is when it's all you have." The words slipped out before he could stop them, and Lana saw the exact moment he realized what he'd revealed. His jaw tightened, the walls starting to rebuild, but this time she didn't let him retreat. "Mr. Dreyer?" She waited until he met her eyes. "For what it's worth, you don't have to carry everything alone anymore." The silence that followed was different from the others they'd shared. This one pulsed with possibility, with the fragile beginning of something neither of them was ready to name. "Lana." Her name on his lips was soft, uncertain. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." She stepped closer, just close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. "I'm saying that everyone deserves someone who sees them, really sees them, even billionaires who think they have to be perfect all the time." For a heartbeat, she thought he might say something that would change everything between them. His hand moved slightly, as if he might reach for her, and she felt her breath catch. Instead, he stepped back. "The Morrison presentation," he said, his voice carefully controlled again. "I should review it one more time before the meeting." "Of course." Lana moved toward the door, understanding the dismissal for what it was, not rejection, but fear. As she reached the threshold, his voice stopped her. "Lana?" She turned back, hope fluttering in her chest. "Thank you. For the blanket, for the shirt, for—" He gestured vaguely, unable to finish the sentence. "For seeing you," she finished quietly. The look he gave her was so intense, so full of longing and terror and something that might have been hope, that it took her breath away. But all he said was, "Yes." As Lana settled at her desk, her heart racing for reasons she didn't want to examine too closely, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them. And in his office, Jackson Dreyer stared at the door she'd just walked through, wondering when his carefully controlled world had started to feel less like a fortress and more like a prison. The scariest part wasn't that she could see through his defenses. It was that he was starting to want her to. Everything unraveled on a Tuesday. Lana arrived at the office to find Jackson already at his desk, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gripping the edge of his desk so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Even from the doorway, she could see the tension radiating from his entire body. "No, I don't care what the Tribune is reporting," he said, his voice deadly calm. "I want a statement ready in 20 minutes, and I want our legal team to—" He noticed her standing there and held up one finger, his gray eyes darker than she'd ever seen them. "Fix it, Davidson. Or find someone who can." He ended the call and immediately reached for his laptop, his movements sharp and agitated. "What's wrong?" Lana asked, setting down her bag and moving closer to his desk. "Business." The word was clipped, dismissive. "Nothing you need to worry about." But Lana had learned to read the subtle signs of his stress over the past 2 weeks. The way his jaw tightened when he was truly upset, the slight tremor in his hands when he was fighting to maintain control. This wasn't just business. "Jackson." She used his first name deliberately, softly. "What happened?" He looked up sharply at the sound of his name on her lips. For a moment, his carefully constructed mask slipped, and she saw something that made her chest ache. Raw pain, mixed with fury and what looked like betrayal. Someone leaked the Riverside project details to the press. His voice was barely controlled. "They're calling it luxury gentrification at the expense of low-income families. They have internal documents, Lana. Emails I wrote. Financial projections that were supposed to be confidential." Lana felt her stomach drop. She'd worked on those files, had seen the passion in his voice when he'd talked about the mixed-income housing development, the way his eyes had lit up when he'd explained how it would provide affordable options alongside luxury units. "But that's not what the project is about. You designed it specifically to prevent displacement." "I know what I designed it for." Jackson stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "But that's not the story they're telling. And now the city council is threatening to pull permits. The investors are getting nervous and—" He stopped, his shoulders sagging slightly. 24 months of work, gone. Lana watched him stare out at the city below, and her heart broke a little at the defeat in his posture. This wasn't just about business or money. This project had mattered to him in a way she was only beginning to understand. Who had access to those documents? Half my executive team, the legal department, city planning. He turned back to face her, and the pain in his eyes was so raw it took her breath away. Or my assistant, who has access to everything. The words hit her like a physical blow. For a moment, the room spun, and she had to grip the back of the chair to steady herself. You think I did this? It wasn't a question. She could see it in his eyes. The suspicion, the hurt, the way he was already rebuilding his walls brick by brick. I don't know what to think. His voice was quiet, but each word landed like a stone. You've been here 2 weeks, Lana. 2 weeks, and suddenly confidential information is splashed across the front page of the Tribune. So you automatically assume it was me. She kept her voice steady, though her hands were shaking. The girl from the wrong side of town who needed this job too badly to risk losing it. That's exactly what you're thinking. Lana straightened, lifting her chin despite the way her world was crumbling around her. Because people like me can't be trusted, right? We're too desperate, too hungry. We'd sell out anyone for the right price. Jackson's face went pale. Lana, I didn't say that. You didn't have to. She moved toward his desk, pulling out her keycard and setting it down with deliberate care. You know what the saddest part is? For a minute there, I thought you were different. I thought you saw me as more than just another employee you couldn't trust. I do see you. No, she shook her head, and he could see tears threatening in her dark eyes. You see what you want to see. A competent assistant when you need something done. A convenient target when something goes wrong, but you don't see me. The silence that followed was deafening. Jackson stood frozen, watching as the woman who had somehow become essential to his daily existence prepared to walk out of his life forever. If you really think I betrayed you, Lana said quietly, then you never knew me at all. She turned toward the door, and Jackson felt panic rise in his chest, sharp and immediate and completely foreign. Lana, wait. She paused but didn't turn around. I can't work for someone who doesn't trust me, Jackson. And I won't work for someone who thinks so little of me that betrayal is the first explanation that comes to mind. What if I was wrong? The question hung in the air between them, vulnerable and desperate. Lana turned slowly, and the look in her eyes made his chest tighten. What if you were wrong about what? About you? About this? About... He gestured helplessly between them. About everything. For a moment, hope flickered across her features. Then her expression hardened again. It's too late for what-ifs, Mr. Dreyer. She reached for the door handle. Find yourself a new assistant, one you can actually trust. As the door closed behind her with a soft click, Jackson sank into his chair, staring at the keycard she'd left behind. The office felt impossibly empty, impossibly quiet. For the first time in 15 years, Jackson Dreyer had found something, someone, more valuable than any business deal. And in one moment of doubt, one moment of letting his old fears override his instincts, he'd lost her. But as he sat there in the silence, one thought echoed in his mind with growing certainty. He'd been wrong about the leak. He knew it with the same instinct that had built his empire, the same gut feeling that had never steered him wrong in business, which meant he'd just destroyed the best thing that had ever happened to him, and now he had to figure out how to get her back. The question was, would she even give him the chance to try? The security footage didn't lie. Jackson stared at the timestamp on his computer screen, 11:47 p.m., Monday night. The executive floor was empty, except for one figure moving through the hallway with purpose, his head of development, Mitchell Thornburg, entering Jackson's office with a master key card. Son of a bitch, he whispered, his hands clenching into fists. It had taken him 3 sleepless days to convince building security to review the footage. 3 days of Lana's empty desk, serving as a constant reminder of his catastrophic mistake. 3 days of functioning like a machine while his chest felt hollow and wrong. Mr. Dreyer, his temporary assistant, a nervous 20-something who jumped every time he spoke, peered around the door. Mr. Davidson is here for the 4 o'clock meeting. Cancel it. Jackson didn't look away from the screen, watching Mitchell's grainy figure rifle through his desk drawers. Cancel everything for the rest of the day? Sir, the Morrison Group is expecting... I said cancel everything. The assistant disappeared quickly, and Jackson leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Mitchell Thornburg, his oldest employee, someone he'd trusted for over a decade, someone who'd been quietly undermining the Riverside project for months, pushing for pure luxury development instead of mixed-income housing. Someone who'd known exactly how to frame Lana for his betrayal. Jackson reached for his phone, then stopped. He needed more than security footage. He needed proof that would clear Lana's name completely and nail Mitchell to the wall. It took him another 2 hours to find it. Hidden in Mitchell's computer, which IT accessed under Jackson's executive authority, was a trail of emails to Tribune reporter Kyle Vance. Promises of exclusive information about Dreyer Development's hypocritical housing schemes. Financial compensation for stories that would expose the truth about gentrification disguised as charity. But it was the final email that made Jackson's blood run cold. Make sure the story mentions the new assistant, Spencer, I think her name is. If this blows up, Dreyer needs someone to blame, and she's perfect. Young, desperate, no connections. He'll throw her under the bus without thinking twice. Jackson stared at the screen until the words blurred together. Mitchell hadn't just stolen information. He deliberately orchestrated Lana's downfall, counting on Jackson's distrust and class prejudices to destroy an innocent woman. And Jackson had played right into his hands. 20 minutes later, Jackson stood in Mitchell's corner office. A security guard flanked behind him. Mitchell looked up from his desk with a smile that died the moment he saw Jackson's expression. "Jax, good to see you. I heard about the Tribune mess. Terrible business. Have you figured out who it was you?" The simple statement hung in the air like a blade. Mitchell's face went through a series of expressions. Surprise, confusion, then calculation. "I'm sorry, what are you talking about?" Jackson placed a printed copy of the email chain on Mitchell's desk. 23 emails to Kyle Vance. $15,000 in wire transfers to an offshore account in your wife's maiden name, and security footage of you in my office Monday night. Mitchell's face went ashen. "Jackson, I can explain. You can explain how you framed an innocent woman for your betrayal? How you counted on me being enough of a prejudiced bastard to blame her instead of investigating properly?" Jackson's voice was deadly quiet. "Please, I'd love to hear that explanation." "She's nobody." Mitchell's mask finally slipped completely. "Some girl from the projects who wormed her way into your good graces. The Riverside project was worth hundreds of millions, and you were going to throw it away for some idealistic housing scheme that would barely break even. So you destroyed it, and you destroyed her in the process. I saved your reputation. Can you imagine what the board would say if they knew you were making emotional decisions because of some assistant you've been staring at like a lovesick teenager?" The words hit their mark, but not in the way Mitchell intended. Instead of shame, Jackson felt clarity wash over him like cold water. "You're right," he said quietly. "I have been making emotional decisions. Starting right now." He turned to the security guard. "Escort Mr. Thornburg out of the building. He's terminated effective immediately. Legal will be in touch about the criminal charges." As Mitchell was led away, still protesting his innocence and demanding lawyers, Jackson stood alone in the office, surrounded by the wreckage of a 15-year professional relationship. But all he could think about was Lana. Lana, who'd walked away with her dignity intact while he'd stood there doubting everything he thought he knew about her. Lana, who'd looked at him with such disappointment that it had felt like a physical blow. Lana, who deserved better than a man too damaged by his own past to recognize honesty when it was standing right in front of him. He pulled out his phone and dialed her number from memory. It went straight to voicemail. "Lana, it's Jackson. I found out who leaked the information. It wasn't you, it was never you, and I should have known that from the beginning. I should have trusted you, and I should have—" His voice caught. "I should have been the man you thought I could be. Please call me back. Please let me explain." He hung up and stared at the phone, waiting for it to ring. It didn't. An hour later, he was standing outside her apartment building in a neighborhood he'd never visited before. Small brick buildings with metal fire escapes, corner stores with neon signs, children playing on sidewalks that had seen better days. It was a world away from his penthouse, but it was real in a way his life had never been. He climbed 3 flights of narrow stairs and knocked on apartment 3B. The door opened a crack, stopped by a security chain. One dark eye peered out at him, then the door closed completely. "Lana, please. I know you don't want to see me, but I need to tell you something. Tell me through the door." Her voice was muffled but firm, and it broke his heart a little more. "It was Mitchell Thornburg. He leaked the information and set you up to take the fall. I have proof. Emails, financial records, security footage. I've already fired him and turned everything over to the police." Silence. "Lana, good for you." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "You cleared my name. Consider your conscience clean. That's not why I'm here. Then why are you here, Jackson? He pressed his forehead against the door, speaking to the wood that separated them. Because I was wrong. Not just about the leak, but about everything. Because I let my own fears and prejudices make me into exactly the kind of man I swore I'd never become. Because you deserved better from me, and I failed you in the worst possible way. The silence stretched so long, he thought she'd walked away. Then he heard the chain slide and the door opened. Lana stood in the doorway wearing faded jeans and an oversized sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked beautiful and tired and utterly done with him. You want forgiveness? She asked quietly. I want a chance to earn it. She studied his face for a long moment, and he held his breath. You hurt me, Jackson. Not just professionally, but personally. You made me feel like all the ways I'm different from your world, my background, my skin color, my circumstances, made me someone you couldn't trust. That's not true, isn't it? She leaned against the doorframe. The moment something went wrong, you looked at the girl who grew up poor and black and decided I must be the problem. How am I supposed to forgive that? The question hung between them, and Jackson realized he didn't have an answer that would fix what he'd broken. All he had was the truth. You're not, he said quietly. You're not supposed to forgive that. You're supposed to demand better from me. And if you give me a chance, just one chance, I'll spend every day proving that I can be the man you believed in. Lana looked at him for a long moment, and he saw years of disappointment in her eyes, not just from him, but from a world that had taught her to expect exactly this kind of betrayal. I don't know if I can trust you again, Jackson. Then don't, he said. Don't trust me. Make me earn it, day by day, until you're sure. For the first time since he'd arrived, something shifted in her expression. Not forgiveness, but maybe the possibility of it. What are you asking for? A second chance. A real one. He took a careful step closer. Come back to work. Let me show you that I learned something from losing you. Let me prove that you were right to believe in me, even when I wasn't. Lana was quiet for so long that Jackson's heart started to sink. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. If I come back, things can't go back to the way they were. I know. I won't be your assistant anymore. I'll be your partner on the Riverside project. Equal say, equal credit, equal respect. Yes. And if you ever doubt my integrity again, I walk away for good. No explanations, no second chances. Are we clear? Jackson looked into her eyes and saw the steel beneath the softness, the strength that had carried her through caring for her dying mother and fighting for respect in a world that questioned her worth. We're clear. She nodded once, then stepped back into her apartment. I'll see you Monday morning, Mr. Dreyer. Don't make me regret this. As the door closed between them, Jackson stood in the hallway, his heart pounding with something that felt dangerously close to hope. He'd gotten his second chance. Now he just had to make sure he didn't waste it. Walking back into Dreyer Development felt like entering a different world. Lana stood in the marble lobby Monday morning, wearing her best navy suit and carrying herself with a confidence that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago. She wasn't the grateful assistant anymore, desperately hoping to keep her job. She was a partner now, someone with power and voice and the right to demand respect. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt eternal, but this time it wasn't nerves making her stomach flutter. It was anticipation. When the doors opened, she found Jackson waiting for her. He looked different too, still impeccably dressed in his charcoal suit, still radiating that controlled power that made people stop and stare. But there was something new in his grey eyes when he looked at her, something that looked almost like reverence. Good morning, Mrs. Spencer. His voice was formal, careful. Thank you for coming back. Good morning, Mr. Dreyer. She stepped past him, noting how he didn't try to guide or hover. I believe we have a project to save. He fell into step beside her as they walked toward the conference room, and Lana caught the subtle stares from other employees. Word traveled fast in corporate buildings, and she could practically hear the whispers. The assistant who walked out, the one who came back as a partner. What does she have on him? Let them wonder. I've called a meeting with the full development team, Jackson said as they reached the conference room. Everyone who worked on Riverside. I thought you should hear their ideas before we move forward. We should hear their ideas, Lana corrected gently. This is a partnership now, remember? Something flickered across his features. Surprise, maybe, or appreciation. Right. We. The conference room was already full when they entered. 12 people around the polished oak table, all turning to stare as Lana took the seat directly across from Jackson, instead of in a corner with a notepad. Everyone, Jackson began, his voice carrying easily through the room. I'd like you to meet Lana Spencer, my new partner on the Riverside Development Project. She'll be leading the community outreach and affordable housing components with full authority to make decisions regarding those aspects. The silence that followed was deafening. Lana could see the confusion, the barely concealed skepticism. She'd been an assistant 3 weeks ago. Now she was sitting at the head table like she belonged there. "I know some of you are wondering about my qualifications," Lana said, her voice calm and clear. "I grew up in neighborhoods like the one we're trying to develop. I understand what gentrification actually looks like when you're the one being priced out. And I know the difference between development that serves a community and development that destroys one." She pulled out a folder, research she'd been doing in her time away, community meetings she'd attended, surveys she'd conducted on her own time. The current Riverside plan is beautiful on paper, but it's missing something crucial: the voices of the people who actually live there. We've designed affordable housing without asking what affordable means to them. We've planned community spaces without understanding what the community actually needs. She spread photos across the table, images from her visits to the neighborhood, conversations with residents, children playing in lots that would be demolished. Mrs. Rodriguez runs a daycare out of her apartment because there's nowhere else for working parents to leave their kids. The Martinez family operates a corner store that's been in business for 30 years, but they're worried about rent increases. The community center burned down 2 years ago, and they've been meeting in a church basement ever since. Lana looked around the table, meeting each skeptical gaze. These aren't obstacles to our development. They're opportunities. What if we incorporated Mrs. Rodriguez's daycare into our community center design? What if we guaranteed commercial space for local businesses like the Martinez store? What if we made the affordable housing truly affordable by basing it on current neighborhood income levels instead of citywide averages? The room had gone completely quiet. Lana could see wheels turning, minds reconsidering everything they thought they knew about the project. "How much would all of that cost?" asked Janet Mueller, the lead architect. "Less than you'd think," Lana replied, "and far less than the lawsuits and community protests we'll face if we ignore these concerns." She pulled out another set of documents, budgets she'd worked out, comparable projects from other cities, cost-benefit analyses that would make any CFO proud. "I've also identified 3 potential funding sources for the community components: federal grants for mixed-income housing, state funding for neighborhood revitalization, and private foundation money for education and childcare facilities." Jackson leaned forward, and Lana caught the look of barely contained amazement on his face. "You did all of this in 3 weeks?" "I did all of this because I care about getting it right." She turned to face him directly. "The question is, do we want to build something that looks good in architectural magazines, or do we want to build something that actually improves people's lives?" The silence stretched for a long moment. Then Jackson smiled, not his polished corporate smile, but something real and warm and proud. "I vote for changing lives." He looked around the table. "All in favor of scrapping our current plans and starting over with Lana's community-first approach?" Every hand went up. As the meeting broke up and teams began forming around Lana's new vision, she found herself alone with Jackson in the conference room. "That was incredible," he said quietly. "You've been thinking about this project differently from the beginning, haven't you?" "I've been thinking about it like someone who knows what it's like to be displaced." Lana began gathering her papers, trying to ignore the way his admiration made her chest flutter. "You hired me to be your assistant, but you needed a translator, someone who could bridge the gap between your world and theirs." "I hired you because you were qualified," Jackson corrected. "But you're right. I needed something I didn't even know I was missing." "And what's that?" He was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "Perspective, conscience. Someone who could see the human cost of my decisions before it was too late to change them." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning that went far beyond business partnerships and development projects. "Jackson, I know." He stepped closer, but not too close, still giving her space, still respecting the boundaries she'd set. "I know we're not there yet. I know I have to earn back your trust, but Lana, watching you in that meeting, seeing you fight for people who can't fight for themselves, I've never been more proud to know someone." The sincerity in his voice made her breath catch. This wasn't the smooth billionaire charm she'd seen him use on others. This was raw honesty, vulnerability offered without expectation of return. "We should get back to work," she said softly, but she didn't move away. "We should," he agreed, but his eyes never left her face. For a moment, they stood there in the empty conference room, suspended between what they were and what they might become. The air between them hummed with possibility, with the fragile beginning of something rebuilt on stronger foundations. Then Lana's phone buzzed with a text, breaking the spell. "The Martinez family wants to meet tomorrow," she said, checking the message. "They're cautiously interested in our plans, but they want details about the commercial space guarantees." "Then we'll give them details." Jackson moved toward the door, then paused. "Lana, thank you for coming back, for pushing us to be better. For Sam, for not giving up on the idea that I could be better too." As he walked away, Lana stood alone, surrounded by her plans and proposals, her heart beating just a little too fast. 3 weeks ago, she'd thought she was walking into a job. Now she realized she'd walked into the chance to change everything, including herself. But the most dangerous part wasn't falling for Jackson Dreyer, the billionaire. It was falling for the man he became when he thought no one was watching, the one who listened when she spoke, who valued her ideas, who looked at her like she was exactly what he'd been searching for his entire life. The question was, could she trust that man to stay? The community meeting was supposed to be routine. Lana stood in the basement of St. Mary's Church, surrounded by folding chairs and the smell of fresh coffee, watching as residents of the Riverside neighborhood filed in. Elderly couples clutching worn folders of documents, young mothers with babies on their hips, teenagers who looked skeptical about any promises adults might make. These were her people, not because of skin color or economic status, but because she understood their wariness, their hope tempered by too many disappointments. Jackson entered quietly, carrying rolled blueprints and wearing jeans instead of his usual suit. The gesture wasn't lost on the room or on Lana. He'd listened when she'd told him that showing up in a $3,000 suit would send the wrong message. "Good evening, everyone," Lana began, her voice carrying easily through the small space. "Thank you for coming. I know some of you are wondering why you should trust another developer with another set of promises. I'm here to tell you why this time is different." She gestured to Jackson, who moved to stand beside her, close enough to show unity, far enough to make it clear she was leading this conversation. "Mr. Dreyer and I want to show you our revised plans, but more importantly, we want to hear your concerns, your neighborhood, your voices, your decisions." An older woman in the front row, Mrs. Patterson, who'd lived on Riverside for 47 years, raised her hand. "How do we know you won't just tear everything down and build condos we can't afford?" "Because we're going to put it in writing," Lana replied. "Legal contracts that guarantee affordable housing stays affordable. Commitments that local businesses get first priority for commercial space. Community oversight of all development decisions." She nodded to Jackson, who unrolled the blueprints on a folding table. "These aren't final plans," he said, his voice careful and respectful. "They're starting points. Every single detail can be changed based on what you tell us tonight." For the next hour, they walked through the designs. The integrated daycare center that Mrs. Rodriguez had suggested. Commercial space designed specifically for the Martinez family's corner store. Green spaces, where children currently played in vacant lots. But it was Miguel Santos, a 17-year-old whose family had been in the neighborhood for 3 generations, who asked the question that changed everything. "What happens when you get bored of this project?" His voice carried the sharp edge of someone who'd seen too many broken promises. "What happens when some other rich developer offers you more money to tear it all down?" The room went silent. It was the question everyone was thinking but hadn't dared to ask. Jackson started to answer, but Lana held up her hand. She looked directly at Miguel, seeing herself at 17, angry, hopeful, and tired of being disappointed by people who claimed to care. "That's the right question," she said, "and I don't have an easy answer for you. But I can tell you this, I grew up in a neighborhood just like this one. I watched it get developed by people who didn't live there, didn't understand it, and didn't stick around to see what their pretty plans actually did to real families." She moved closer to the group, her voice gaining strength. "I can't promise Mr. Dreyer won't get bored. I can't promise some corporate board won't decide this project isn't profitable enough. But I can promise you this. I'm not going anywhere. This project succeeds or fails based on whether it actually improves your lives, not whether it looks good in a magazine." "What does that mean exactly?" asked Mrs. Patterson. Lana took a deep breath, making a decision that would change everything. "It means I'm moving here, to Riverside. I'm buying one of the affordable housing units we're building, and I'm making this neighborhood my home. If this project fails, I fail with it. If it succeeds, we all succeed together." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. In her peripheral vision, Lana saw Jackson's eyes widen with shock. They'd never discussed this, She'd decided it in this moment, standing in front of people who needed to know someone would be accountable for the promises being made. "You'd really do that?" Miguel asked, suspicion warring with hope in his voice. "I'll sign the purchase agreement this week," Lana replied. "Before groundbreaking, before construction, before any of you have to trust us with your homes." Mrs. Patterson leaned forward. "And what about him?" She pointed to Jackson. "What's his skin in the game?" All eyes turned to Jackson, and Lana held her breath. This was his moment, the test of whether he truly understood what she was asking of him. He was quiet for a long moment, studying the faces around him. Then he spoke, his voice steady and certain. "Mrs. Patterson, I can't move to Riverside. I have business commitments that require me to live downtown, but I can do something else." He pulled out his phone, typed quickly, then turned the screen toward the room. "I just transferred $5 million into an escrow account that can only be accessed if this project meets every single commitment we make tonight. If we fail you, you keep the money for whatever the community decides it needs." The silence was deafening. $5 million, whispered Mrs. Rodriguez. "That's—" Miguel shook his head. "That's real money. Money that could actually change things." "That's the point," Jackson said quietly. "Ms. Spencer is right. Words are cheap. Actions matter. This project either succeeds for all of us, or it fails for all of us." The meeting continued for another 2 hours, but the energy had shifted completely. These weren't corporate developers making empty promises anymore. These were partners with genuine stakes in the outcome. As the residents filed out, many stopping to shake Lana's hand or ask detailed questions about timeline, she found herself alone in the church basement with Jackson. $5 million, she said quietly. "That wasn't in any of our planning sessions. Neither was you moving to Riverside." He stepped closer, his gray eyes intense. "Lana, you didn't have to do that. You could have convinced them without putting my money where my mouth is." She turned to face him fully. "Yes, I could have. But then I'd be just another person making promises I didn't have to keep." "Is that what you think I was doing? Making promises I didn't have to keep?" The question hung between them, loaded with meaning that went far beyond neighborhood development. "I think," Lana said carefully, "that you're learning what it means to have something to lose." Jackson moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, close enough to catch his scent, expensive cologne mixed with something uniquely him. "I've had something to lose for weeks now," he said quietly. "I just didn't realize how much until I almost lost it." "Jackson, I know we're taking this slow. I know I have to earn back your trust. But Lana, what you did tonight, the way you stood up for those people, the way you put yourself on the line for something you believe in, I've never known anyone like you." His hand moved toward hers, stopping just short of touching. "You make me want to be the kind of man who deserves someone like you." The words hung in the air between them, vulnerable and honest and so full of longing that Lana felt her breath catch. For a moment, she let herself imagine what it would be like to close that gap between them, to trust the sincerity in his eyes, to believe that the man standing in a church basement in jeans and sneakers was more real than the billionaire in designer suits. Then her phone buzzed with a text from Miguel. "Thank you for tonight. For the first time, I actually have hope." Reality crashed back over her. This wasn't about her and Jackson anymore. This was about an entire community that was trusting them to keep their word. "We should go," she said softly. "Big day tomorrow." "Lana," his voice stopped her as she reached for her jacket. "What you did tonight, it wasn't just brave, it was right. And I want you to know that whatever happens between us personally, I'll never let you down professionally. This project, these people, they matter to me now because they matter to you." As they walked out of the church together, side by side but not touching, Lana felt something shift in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the dangerous beginning of belief. The question wasn't whether Jackson Dreyer could change. The question was whether she was brave enough to let herself fall for the man he was becoming. Because standing in that church basement, watching him put $5 million on the line for people he barely knew, she'd seen something that scared her more than his wealth or power ever had. She'd seen the man she could love completely, and that terrified her more than anything else. The call came at 2:47 a.m. Lana jolted awake, her heart hammering as she fumbled for her phone in the darkness of her apartment. Unknown number, but something made her answer. "Lana!" Jackson's voice was rough, strained. "I'm sorry to call so late, but I didn't know who else." "Jackson, what's wrong?" She sat up, instantly alert. In the 6 weeks since the community meeting, they'd grown closer, working late on project details, sharing quiet conversations over coffee, building something careful and precious between them. But he'd never called her like this. "It's my father." His voice cracked slightly. He's alive, Lana. And he's here." The words hung in the air, making no sense. "What do you mean? I thought your father died when you were young." "So did I." A bitter laugh escaped him. "Turns out my mother just told me he was dead. Easier than explaining why he left us for another family. Another son." Lana's chest tightened. "Jackson, where are you?" "The office. I know it's stupid, but I couldn't go home. Couldn't sit in that empty apartment and think about—" He trailed off. "I'm coming over." "Lana, you don't have to—" "I'm already putting on shoes. Give me 20 minutes. The line went quiet for a moment. Then, so softly she almost missed it. "Thank you." Lana dressed quickly. Jeans, sweater, sneakers, and grabbed her keys. The streets were empty at this hour, the city stripped down to its essential self. Streetlights and silence and the occasional taxi carrying someone home from a life she couldn't imagine. She found Jackson in his office, still wearing the clothes from their dinner meeting with the architectural firm 8 hours earlier. He was sitting on the floor beside the floor-to-ceiling windows, knees drawn up, staring out at the city lights below. "Hey," she said softly, settling beside him on the plush carpet. "Hey yourself." He didn't look at her, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands were clenched into fists. "Thanks for coming. I know I shouldn't have called." "Yes, you should have." She studied his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. "Tell me what happened." Jackson was quiet for so long, she thought he might not answer. Then the words began spilling out, raw and painful and years in the making. "He showed up at my building tonight. Robert Dreyer, 63 years old, silver hair, expensive suit. Looked exactly like what I might become in 25 years. His voice was flat, emotionless. He said he'd been following my career, said he was proud of what I'd accomplished. How long has he been gone? 31 years. I was 6 when he left." Jackson finally turned to look at her, and the pain in his grey eyes made her breath catch. "My mother told me he died in a car accident. I grieved for him, Lana. I spent my entire childhood missing a man who was alive and well and raising another family 2 states away." Lana felt anger rise in her chest, not at the boy who'd lost his father, but at the adults who'd made choices that shattered a child's world. What did he want? Connection. The word came out like a curse. He's dying, apparently. Cancer. Wants to make amends before it's too late. Wants to explain why he left, why he stayed away, why he never tried to contact me until now. "And what did you tell him?" Jackson laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I told him to go to hell. Then I came here and sat on this floor for 4 hours, trying to figure out why I feel like I'm 6 years old again." Lana moved closer, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Because some wounds never heal, they just get covered up. And when someone presses on that spot, it hurts just as much as it did the first time." He turned to look at her, something vulnerable and grateful flickering in his expression. "How do you always know exactly what to say?" "Because I know what it feels like to have a parent disappoint you." She thought of her own father, present in body but absent in every way that mattered, a man who'd left her and her mother to fend for themselves long before he actually walked out the door. Different circumstances, same wound. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the city sprawling endlessly below them. Then Jackson spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you know what the worst part is? For about 30 seconds when I first saw him, I was happy. 30 seconds of thinking my father had come back for me. Then reality kicked in, and I realized he'd only come back because he was dying. That's not your fault, Jackson, isn't it?" He turned to face her fully. "Maybe if I'd been a better son, maybe if I'd been worth staying for—" "Stop." Lana's voice was firm, cutting through his self-recrimination. "You were 6 years old. Whatever choices your parents made, whatever lies they told, whatever pain they caused, none of that was about you. You were a child who deserved better from the adults who were supposed to protect you." The words hit their mark. She watched his carefully constructed walls crumble, watched years of suppressed grief and anger and abandonment issues rise to the surface. "I don't know how to forgive him," he said quietly. "I don't know how to forgive her. And I don't know how to stop feeling like that 6-year-old boy who wasn't worth staying for." Without thinking, Lana reached for his hand. His fingers closed around hers immediately, desperate and strong and slightly trembling. "You don't have to forgive them," she said. "Not today, maybe not ever. But you have to forgive yourself for believing their actions had anything to do with your worth. How? By looking at the man you've become despite them. By seeing what I see when I look at you. And what's that? Lana studied his face. The pain and hope and fear all tangled together in his grey eyes. This was dangerous territory, these words that would change everything between them. But sitting on the floor of his office at 3 a.m., watching him fall apart and try to hold himself together simultaneously, she realized she was already in too deep to worry about safety. I see a man who builds communities instead of just buildings. I see someone who puts $5 million on the line for people he barely knows, because it's the right thing to do. I see a man who calls his business partner at 3 a.m., not because he wants something from her, but because he trusts her enough to be vulnerable. Her thumb traced across his knuckles, and she felt him shiver slightly at the contact. I see someone worth staying for, Jackson. Even when things get complicated, even when the past hurts, even when forgiveness feels impossible. The silence that followed was charged with everything they hadn't said, everything they'd been building toward for weeks. Jackson's free hand moved to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. Lana, he said, her name a prayer and a question and a confession all at once. I know. She leaned into his touch, her heart racing. I know this is complicated. I know we're supposed to be taking things slow. I know we work together and there are a million reasons why this is a bad idea. But I care about you. Not the billionaire, not the boss, not the public image. I care about the man sitting on this floor at 3 a.m., trusting me with the parts of himself he doesn't show anyone else. Jackson's breath caught. I care about you too, more than I should, more than is probably smart. Probably. They were so close now that she could count his eyelashes, could see the exact moment when his gaze dropped to her lips and stayed there. Lana, her name was barely a whisper. Yes? If I kiss you right now, everything changes. We can't go back to just being business partners. We can't pretend this is just professional. I know. And if this goes wrong, if I mess this up the way I mess up everything important, she pressed her finger to his lips, silencing his fears. Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But right now, in this moment, I want you to kiss me. I want you to stop thinking and calculating and worrying about what might go wrong. What if I'm not good at this, at being what you need? Lana smiled, and it was soft and sure and full of a hope that terrified them both. Then you'll learn. Because that's what people do when they care about each other. They figure it out as they go. The kiss, when it finally came, was nothing like she'd expected. Soft and tentative and desperate all at once, like he was trying to memorize the feel of her lips against his, like he couldn't quite believe she was real, that she was choosing him despite everything. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. I don't want to hurt you, he whispered. Then don't. What if I don't know how to do this? What if I'm too damaged? Lana pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. Then we'll figure it out together. One day at a time, one kiss at a time, one moment of trust at a time. As they sat there on the floor of his office, the city beginning to wake up around them, Lana realized she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She wasn't just falling for Jackson Dreyer anymore. She was already gone. And for the first time in her life, that didn't scare her. It felt like coming home. The first photograph appeared in the Tribune's business section on a Thursday morning. Lana stared at her phone screen in the coffee shop across from the construction site, her heart sinking as she read the headline, Dreyer's new love interest from assistant to girlfriend in record time. The photo was grainy, but unmistakable. Her and Jackson walking out of St. Mary's Church together after last week's community meeting, his hand on the small of her back, both of them smiling. To anyone looking, they appeared to be exactly what they were becoming, two people falling in love. But the article beneath the photo was vicious. Sources close to Dreyer Development confirm that billionaire CEO Jackson Dreyer has moved on from his usual type, supermodels and socialites, to his former assistant, Lana Spencer. The relationship raises questions about workplace harassment and whether Spencer's rapid promotion from secretary to development partner was based on merit or other considerations. Lana's hands shook as she read further. They dug into her background, her mother's illness, her previous employment gaps. They'd found photos of her old apartment, interviewed former neighbors who described her as nice enough, but always seemed to be reaching above her station. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jackson. Ignore it. Complete garbage. Heading to site now. But Lana couldn't ignore it, because buried beneath the sensationalism and classist assumptions was a question that had been gnawing at her for weeks. Was she fooling herself about what this really was? When she arrived at the Riverside construction site 20 minutes later, Jackson was already there, standing with the foreman and pointing at foundation work that was ahead of schedule. He looked up as she approached, his grey eyes immediately scanning her face. "You read it?" "Hard to miss when it's the top story in the business section." Lana tried to keep her voice light, professional. They were in public, surrounded by construction workers and neighbors who'd stopped to watch the progress. "Lana," his voice was quiet, concerned. "Talk to me." "Not here." She glanced around at the curious faces. After the site inspection, the next 2 hours were torture. They walked through the partially constructed community center, reviewed progress on the affordable housing units, met with Mrs. Rodriguez about the integrated daycare space. All normal, professional interactions that felt completely surreal, given the chaos in Lana's head, because the article had forced her to confront something she'd been avoiding. What exactly were she and Jackson to each other? They'd kissed once, 3 weeks ago, in his office at 3 a.m. Since then there had been stolen moments, hands touching as they passed documents, conversations that ran long into the evening, looks that lasted just a beat too long, but they hadn't defined anything, hadn't talked about what was happening between them. Now the whole city was talking about it instead. When they finally made it back to his car, a modest sedan he'd started driving to the neighborhood instead of his usual luxury vehicles, Jackson turned to face her fully. "Okay, talk to me. What's really going on?" Lana stared out the windshield at the construction site, watching workers pour concrete for what would become the community center's foundation. Solid, permanent, built to last. "They're not entirely wrong," she said quietly. "What?" "The article, they're not entirely wrong." She turned to meet his eyes. "I was your assistant. You did promote me. We are involved, or becoming involved, or whatever this is. From the outside, it looks exactly like what they're saying it looks like." Jackson's jaw tightened. "You think I promoted you because we were sleeping together?" "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "I think you promoted me because I earned it. But I also think—" She took a breath, forcing herself to say the words that had been haunting her. "I think I need to know what we're doing here, Jackson. Because right now to everyone else I look like another woman who slept her way to the top, and I can't live with that." The silence that followed was deafening. Jackson stared at her, something like hurt flickering across his features. "Is that really what you think? That this is some kind of quid pro quo arrangement?" "I think," Lana said carefully, "that I've worked my entire life to be taken seriously. And in one newspaper article, all of that gets reduced to sleeping with the boss. So what are you saying?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications that terrified her, because she knew what the smart thing to do was: step back, keep things professional, protect her reputation and her heart from the inevitable damage that came from loving someone in a different league. But looking at Jackson's face, seeing the genuine confusion and hurt there, she realized the smart thing and the right thing weren't the same. "I'm saying," she began slowly, "that if we're going to do this, really do this, I need to know it's real. Not a rebound from your models and socialites. Not a convenience because I'm already in your life. Not gratitude because I helped you through a crisis. Lana, I need to know that you see a future with me. A real future, not just stolen moments and secret kisses and pretending we're just business partners when other people are watching." Jackson was quiet for a long moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel. When he finally spoke, his voice was so soft she had to lean closer to hear him. "Do you want to know what I see when I look at you?" "Yes. I see the woman who called me out on my prejudices in our first meeting. I see someone who fought for a community that wasn't even hers because it was the right thing to do. I see the person who came to my office at 3 a.m. because I was falling apart and didn't judge me for it." He turned to face her fully, his grey eyes intense and certain. "I see the woman I want to build something with. Not just this project, not just a business partnership, but a life. A real life with Sunday morning coffee and fights about whose turn it is to take out the trash and meeting each other's families and all the boring, beautiful, ordinary things I never thought I wanted." Lana's breath caught. "Jackson, I know the timing is terrible. I know the optics are bad. I know dating your business partner is complicated and messy and potentially career-ending for both of us." He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "But I also know that I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you, and I'm tired of pretending that's not true. What are you asking me?" "I'm asking you to take a leap with me. I'm asking you to stop worrying about what other people think and start focusing on what we think, what we want, what we're building together." Lana studied his face, searching for any hint of uncertainty or manipulation. All she saw was honesty, raw, vulnerable, and absolutely certain. "The article will be the first of many," she said quietly. "People are going to question everything about us, about my qualifications, about your motives. Are you prepared for that? Are you?" The question forced her to look at her own fears, her own insecurities about worthiness and belonging, because this wasn't really about the newspaper article or public opinion. This was about whether she believed she deserved to be loved by someone like Jackson Dreyer. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I." His thumb traced across her knuckles. "I'm scared of messing this up. I'm scared of not being good enough for you. I'm scared that you'll realize you can do better than a damaged billionaire with trust issues." "And I'm scared," Lana said, "that I'll always be the assistant who got lucky, that I'll never be your equal in other people's eyes." "Then let's be scared together." Jackson lifted their joined hands, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. "Let's build something so strong, so real, so undeniably right, that it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks." For a moment, Lana let herself imagine it, walking into company events as his partner, not his employee, introducing him to the Martinez family as her boyfriend, not just her business colleague, building a life that belonged to both of them, not just his world or hers, but something entirely new. "Okay," she said softly, "okay. Okay, let's take the leap." She turned their hands so she could kiss his knuckles in return. "Let's see what we can build together." The smile that spread across Jackson's face was brilliant and relieved, and so full of love that it took her breath away. "So, what do we do about the Tribune article?" Lana grinned, feeling lighter than she had all day. "We ignore it, and we make sure our next public appearance is so obviously, ridiculously, head over heels in love, that no one can question whether this is real." "I like that plan." "Good, because tomorrow night you're taking me to dinner. Somewhere public, somewhere fancy, somewhere that leaves absolutely no doubt about how we feel about each other." As Jackson leaned across the console to kiss her, soft and sure and full of promise, Lana realized something that surprised her. She wasn't scared anymore. She was ready to fall completely, publicly, irrevocably in love with Jackson Dreyer. The only question now was whether the rest of the world was ready to watch it happen. 6 months later, the Riverside Community Center was ready for its grand opening. Lana stood in the main hall, watching as families streamed through the doors she and Jackson had fought to design, fund, and build. Children ran toward the playground equipment visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. Teenagers gathered around the computer lab that would offer free coding classes. Elderly residents settled into comfortable chairs in the library space, already deep in conversation about the book club Mrs. Patterson had organized. It was everything they'd dreamed of and more. "Look at that," Jackson said softly, appearing beside her with 2 cups of coffee from the Fair Trade Cafe that now operated in the corner space. "Mrs. Rodriguez's daycare has a waiting list 3 months long." Lana smiled, accepting the coffee and letting herself lean into his warmth. 6 months of being together publicly had taught her to cherish these quiet moments before events, when it was just the two of them watching their shared vision come to life. "And the Martinez family store?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Doubled their revenue in the first month. Turns out having 400 new neighbors is good for business." Jackson's arms circled her waist, natural and easy and right. "Miguel Santos starts his internship with our architectural firm next week. The 17-year-old who didn't trust us? The same one. He's designed some modifications for the community garden that are honestly brilliant." Lana felt her chest swell with pride, not for herself, but for the community that had taken a chance on 2 people with a crazy idea about development that actually served people instead of displacing them. "Miss Spencer, Mr. Dreyer." They turned to see Miguel himself approaching, wearing a crisp button-down shirt and a grin that made him look younger than his 18 years. "The Tribune photographer wants pictures of you with the first families moving into the affordable housing units," he said. "Something about a follow-up story to—" He paused, suddenly awkward. "To the article questioning whether I slept my way to this position?" Lana finished with a laugh. "It's okay, Miguel. We can talk about it." The follow-up article had run 2 weeks ago, 6 months after the original hit piece. This time the headline read, "Riverside Development, a model for community-centered growth." The reporter had interviewed dozens of residents, city officials, and housing advocates. Not one person questioned Lana's qualifications or contributions. In fact, 3 other cities had already reached out about replicating their model. "You sure you're okay with more photos?" Jackson asked quietly. "I know the media attention has been intense," Lana suggested. Invasive? Occasionally sexist and racist? All of the above. She turned to face him fully, studying the concern in his gray eyes. 6 months of being Chicago's most unexpected power couple had taught them both what it meant to love someone in the public eye. The scrutiny was relentless, the judgment swift, and the pressure to be perfect exhausting. But it had also taught them something else. They were stronger together than either of them had ever been alone. "I'm more than okay with it," she said, "because every photo, every article, every public appearance is proof that this works. That we work. That a billionaire and a girl from the projects can build something real and lasting and beautiful. Even when they call you a gold digger? Even when they call you a fool for giving up supermodels for someone ordinary." Jackson's laugh was warm and genuine. "Ordinary? Lana, you revolutionized how this city thinks about development. You've been invited to speak at 3 universities about community-centered urban planning. You're about as far from ordinary as it's possible to get. To you, maybe. To the world," she shrugged. "To the world, I'm still the assistant who got lucky." "Do you care?" It was a question he'd asked her dozens of times over the past 6 months, and her answer had evolved each time. Today, surrounded by tangible proof of what they'd accomplished together, she finally knew her response. "I care about the people in this room. I care about the families who can afford to live here because we insisted on real affordability standards. I care about Miguel having opportunities he wouldn't have had 6 months ago." She reached up to touch his face, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw. "I care about you and me and what we're building together. Everything else is just noise." The kiss he gave her was soft and public and full of 6 months' worth of certainty. When they broke apart, Lana noticed several people had stopped to watch them with fond smiles. "Get a room," called Mrs. Patterson from across the hall, but she was laughing. "Soon," Jackson called back, making Lana's eyes widen. "Soon?" But before he could answer, Miguel was back with the photographer, and they were swept into an hour of interviews and pictures and conversations with residents who wanted to thank them personally. It wasn't until much later, after the crowds had thinned and the official ceremonies were over, that Lana found herself alone with Jackson in the community center garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the sounds of families enjoying their new space drifted through the evening air. "It's beautiful," she said, looking around at the vegetable plots and playground equipment, the benches where neighbors were already gathering to chat. "It is." But when she turned, Jackson wasn't looking at the garden. He was looking at her. "Lana, there's something I need to ask you." Something in his tone made her heart skip. "Okay. 6 months ago you asked me if I could see a future with you. A real future." He took her hands, his fingers slightly trembling. "I told you I could see Sunday morning coffee and fights about taking out the trash and all the ordinary beautiful things I'd never thought I wanted. I remember. I've had those things with you, every single one of them and more. But there's one thing I haven't had yet." He dropped to one knee, and Lana's breath caught. "The chance to promise you forever." The ring box he pulled from his pocket was simple, elegant, nothing flashy or ostentatious, just a classic solitaire that caught the last rays of sunlight and threw them back in tiny rainbows. "Lana Spencer," Jackson said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "You walked into my office 8 months ago and changed everything about who I thought I was and what I thought I wanted. You made me brave enough to care about something more than profit margins. You made me believe that love could be partnership, that success could be measured in lives improved instead of dollars earned." Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't care. "You made me want to be worthy of someone like you," he continued. "Someone who sees the best in people, who fights for what's right, who builds bridges instead of walls. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve the love you've given me?" For a moment, Lana couldn't speak. She looked around at the community center they'd built together, at the families they'd fought for, at the man kneeling in front of her who'd become her partner in every sense of the word. "Yes," she said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, of course, yes." The ring slid onto her finger perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand. When Jackson stood and kissed her, spinning her around in the garden they'd designed together, Lana felt something click into place in her chest. This was home. Not the building or the neighborhood or the city, but this, being loved completely by someone who saw all of her and chose her anyway, being part of something bigger than herself, something that mattered, something that would last. "I love you," she said against his lips. "I love you too." He set her down gently, his hands framing her face. Ready to scandalize the Tribune with an engagement announcement? Bring it on, she said, grinning. Let them try to explain how the billionaire's assistant became his fiancée. I can't wait to see them spin that story. As they walked back toward the community center hand in hand, Lana's new ring catching the streetlights, she realized something that made her laugh out loud. What? Jackson asked. I was just thinking. 8 months ago, I thought I was applying for a job as your assistant. And now? Now I realize I was applying for the position of your partner. In business, in life, in everything that matters. She squeezed his hand. Best job interview of my life. Best hiring decision of mine. They paused at the entrance to the community center, looking back at the families still enjoying the space as evening settled around them. Think we'll be able to do this again? Lana asked. Find another community, build something beautiful. With you? Jackson brought her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her new ring. I think we can do anything. As they walked into their future together, surrounded by the life they'd built and the love they'd found, Lana knew he was right. They could do anything, starting with forever. 5 years later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of their home office, casting golden light across architectural plans scattered on the shared desk. Lana looked up from her laptop, watching as Jackson paced the length of their converted garage, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing animatedly as he discussed zoning permits for their latest project in Detroit. His hair was slightly mussed from sleep, his feet bare beneath expensive suit pants, and there was a coffee stain on his shirt that he hadn't noticed yet. 5 years of marriage had taught her to love these imperfect morning moments most of all. No, the community input sessions are non-negotiable, he was saying into the phone. We don't break ground until every resident has been heard. That's how we work. That's how we work. Lana smiled, remembering when those words would have been impossible for him to say. Their company, Dreyer Spencer Development, now operated in 7 cities, each project built on the same principles they'd established in Riverside. Community first, profit second, sustainability always. It wasn't the fastest way to build wealth, but it was the only way that let them sleep peacefully at night. Mama Lana, Mama Lana! The voice belonged to Sophia Martinez Chen, age 4, who came barreling through the office door with the kind of energy that could power small cities. Behind her, moving more sedately, came Mrs. Rodriguez with baby James strapped to her chest. I'm sorry, Mrs. Rodriguez said, slightly breathless. She heard Uncle Jackson on the phone and wanted to show you her drawing. Never apologize for Sophia, Lana said, scooping the little girl into her arms. What did you draw, sweetheart? Sophia thrust a crayon masterpiece toward her, stick figures holding hands in front of what might have been a building or possibly a rainbow. It's you and Uncle Jackson and me and baby James and Abuela Rodriguez and all the people in our neighborhood. It's beautiful. Lana kissed the top of Sophia's head, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood joy. Should we put it on the refrigerator? Yes. Next to the picture of your wedding, Mrs. Rodriguez settled into the armchair they kept in the office, specifically for these impromptu visits. At 72, she'd become the unofficial grandmother to half the children in Riverside, including the 2 that Lana and Jackson were in the process of adopting. How are the home studies going? Mrs. Rodriguez asked quietly. Final visit is next week, Lana replied, her heart doing the little flutter it always did when she thought about Marcus and Destiny, siblings, ages 6 and 8, who'd been in foster care for 2 years. The social worker says everything looks good, but you're nervous. Terrified, Lana admitted. What if we're not ready? What if we mess up? What if they don't actually want to be here permanently? Jackson ended his call and crossed to where she sat with Sophia, his hand settling on her shoulder with the easy intimacy of 5 years together. Then we'll figure it out, he said quietly. Same way we figured out everything else. It was the same thing he'd said when they'd bought the house in Riverside 3 years ago, choosing to live in the community they'd helped revitalize instead of the penthouse downtown. The same thing he'd said when they'd started the scholarship fund for local high school graduates. The same thing he'd said when Lana had cried for an hour after their first failed adoption match. We'll figure it out. Besides, Sophia piped up from Lana's lap, Marcus and Destiny already picked out their rooms when they visited last week. Destiny wants the one with the window seat so she can read, and Marcus wants the one next to Uncle Jackson's office so he can help with the building plans. How do you know all that? Jackson asked, grinning. Because I asked them, obviously. They're going to be my brother and sister, so I needed to know important stuff. The casual way Sophia claimed the children as family made Lana's chest tight with emotion. This was what they'd built together. Not just successful businesses or beautiful buildings, but a community where love expanded to include whoever needed it most. Speaking of important stuff, Mrs. Rodriguez said, shifting baby James to her other arm, Miguel wanted me to tell you that his girlfriend said yes to his proposal. He's planning to ask if you'll design their house. Miguel's engaged? Lana practically bounced with excitement, making Sophia giggle. When, where, who is she? Why didn't he call us? Because, said a familiar voice from the doorway, I wanted to tell you in person. Miguel Santos stood in the entrance to their office, looking every inch the successful architect he'd become. Confident, professional, and wearing a grin that stretched from ear to ear. Behind him stood a woman with kind eyes and paint-stained fingers who had to be the fiancée. This is Carmen, Miguel said, pulling the woman forward. Carmen, these are the crazy people who changed my life when I was 17, and too angry to appreciate it. I've heard so much about you both, Carmen said, accepting Lana's enthusiastic hug. Miguel talks about the Riverside project constantly. I think half of our first date was him explaining community-centered development principles. And you still said yes to a second date? Jackson asked, amused. She's an art teacher, Miguel explained. She understood the part about building things that actually serve people. Plus, she's designing a mural for the new community center in Detroit. As the conversation flowed around her, Miguel and Carmen's wedding plans, baby James's first attempts at solid food, Sophia's detailed plans for being the best big sister ever. Lana found herself stepping back mentally to observe the scene. 5 years ago, she'd walked into Jackson's office looking for a job. Now she was surrounded by the family they'd chosen and the community they'd built, in a house filled with laughter and plans for the future. Tomorrow, if everything went well, Marcus and Destiny would be moving into their forever home. Next month, Miguel and Carmen would start building theirs. Next year there would be new projects, new communities, new opportunities to prove that development could serve people instead of displacing them. What are you thinking about? Jackson asked softly, appearing beside her as the others migrated toward the kitchen for Sophia's promised refrigerator art installation. Just this, she gestured around them. All of it. How different everything is from where we started. Good different. The best different. She leaned into his side, still marveling at how perfectly they fit together. Do you ever miss it? Your old life? The simplicity of just making money? Jackson was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. You know what I miss most about my old life? What? How easy it was to measure success. Profit margins, stock prices, quarterly reports. Everything was quantifiable. He looked toward the kitchen, where Sophia was explaining to Carmen why her drawing deserved the place of honor next to their wedding photo. This is messier, harder to measure. You can't put community impact in a spreadsheet. But every night I go to sleep knowing that I spent the day making the world a little bit better, that the work we do matters to people whose names I know, whose stories I care about. He turned to face her fully. I wouldn't trade that for all the simple profit margins in the world, even when Sophia uses our architectural plans as coloring pages. Especially then. His laugh was warm and content. She's going to be an architect someday, you know. She's already better at community planning than half my graduate school classmates. And Marcus wants to learn about sustainable building materials. And Destiny is convinced that every neighborhood needs a library and a garden. We're raising the next generation of community developers, Lana said, wonder in her voice. We're raising kids who understand that success means lifting others up with you, Jackson corrected. That's the best legacy we could leave. They stood together in their home office, surrounded by the evidence of lives well lived and love well shared. Through the window, Lana could see the Riverside Community Center in the distance, its playground full of children whose families could afford to live in the neighborhood they'd helped create. Ready for the rest of our lives? Jackson asked, echoing the question he'd posed 5 years ago, when everything was uncertain and terrifying and new. With you? Lana reached for his hand, her wedding ring catching the morning light. I'm ready for anything. And as they walked toward the kitchen to join their chosen family, Lana knew with absolute certainty that she was ready for Marcus and Destiny to come home for good, ready for whatever challenges their next project would bring, ready for the beautiful, messy, meaningful life they'd built together. One community, one family, one day at a time. Because the best love stories weren't about finding your prince, they were about finding your partner in building a better world. What would you have done differently if you knew then what you know now? And what's the most important lesson this story taught you about love, success, and what really matters in life? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.